The drawing-room at Ashbourne Hall was full of people, but Vivienne Marsh stood near the tall window and watched the candles flicker. She had counted 42 of them. She counted them every Wednesday night when her aunt forced her to attend. The smell of beeswax mixed with the smell of roses someone had cut too early in the season, and the wood smoke from the fire made her eyes feel tight. She wore a pale grey gown. It was not the dress she would have chosen. Her aunt had picked it because grey did not draw the eye. Grey, her aunt said, was the colour of a girl who knew her place. Vivienne had not argued. She had stopped arguing about gowns 4 years ago. She was 26 years old. In the eyes of the room she was already finished. Girls came out at 17. By 20 they were either married or marked. By 26 they were furniture. She pressed her thumb against the small button on her right glove. She did this often. The button was loose, and she liked the feel of it shifting under the pad of her thumb. It was her secret thing. She had been doing it since she was 18, since the first ball where no one had asked her to dance. Now, 8 years later, her gloves were softer in that one spot. She could find the button without looking. The musicians played a country dance. The floor filled with couples. Her cousin Petra spun by, laughing too loudly at something a young officer had said. Petra was 22 and engaged to a viscount. Petra had been engaged for 6 months and would not let anyone forget it. Vivienne kept her face still. She had practiced this face for a long time. It was not a smile and not a frown. It was the face of a woman who was paying attention to nothing and everything. A footman passed with a tray of small glasses. The wine was warm and smelled too sweet. She did not take one. She had learned long ago that drinking made it harder to stand straight through 3 full hours of being unseen. Across the room, her aunt was talking to Lady Marston. They both looked over at her. Her aunt's mouth tightened. Lady Marston gave the kind of small, polite smile that meant pity. Vivienne pressed the button on her glove twice and turned her face back to the window. The window glass was cold against her shoulder when she leaned, just barely, into it. Outside, the gravel drive was wet from afternoon rain. Lanterns burned by the great front doors. She could see the line of carriages waiting, the breath of the horses making small clouds in the lamplight. She thought, not for the first time, how much she would like to be one of those horses, to stand in the cold and wait for nothing. Then the room changed. She did not see him come in. She felt it. The chatter dropped by half. The musicians did not stop, but the dancers slowed. Heads turned. Even the footman, who had been moving like clockwork, paused for one breath before going on. She looked. He was tall, but that was not what made the room shift. He was not the most handsome man she had ever seen. His dark hair was cut shorter than was fashionable. His coat was black, very plain, very well made. He stood just inside the doorway and took the room in the way a man takes in a road he has walked before. Heavy gaze. No smile. No bow until the host reached him. The Duke of Carrowmere. She had heard his name many times. Everyone had. He was 34. He had inherited the dukedom at 22. He had not married. He had no rumoured mistress. He had a reputation for being so cold that the gossiping aunts called him the Frost Duke when they wanted to sound clever. He had not come to a London party in 4 years. Vivienne watched him as carefully as everyone else. But she watched him from her place by the window, where no one ever looked. She had a clear view across the heads of the crowd. He bowed to the host. He bowed to the hostess. He let 3 young women be presented to him. To each one, he gave the smallest bow that was still polite. He did not smile. He did not speak more than a sentence. The mother of one of the girls tried to keep him in conversation, and he listened with a face like a closed door. Vivienne pressed her thumb against the loose button on her glove. She counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. He looked up. Across the room, across the heads of 40 people, his eyes found hers. She did not look away. She did not know why. She should have. A woman of her age and standing, caught staring at a duke, would be talked about for a week. But she did not look away, and neither did he. It was a moment that should have been short. It was not. The musicians played 8 more bars. The dancers turned, and turned again. Lady Marston laughed at something someone said, and the Duke of Carrowmere stood by the door and looked at Vivienne Marsh. And Vivienne Marsh looked back. She felt the cold of the window glass behind her shoulder. She heard her own breath. She smelled the candle wax and the smoke and the wet wool of someone's coat near the door. She thought, very clearly, he does not know me. He cannot know me. He is looking at the window. He is looking past me. But he was not. He began to walk. She saw 3 matrons shift to intercept him. They had their daughters lined up like soldiers. The Duke walked past the first one without seeing her. He walked past the second one without seeing her. The third one stepped fully into his path, and he stepped around her without breaking pace. He did not look angry. He looked like a man who had a single errand and would not be turned from it. Vivienne's hand fell from her glove. Her aunt, who had finally noticed what was happening, opened her mouth to call her. But the Duke was already there. He stopped 2 steps in front of her. He bowed. It was not a small bow. It was the bow he had not given to the Earl's daughter. "Miss Marsh," he said. He said her name like he already knew it, like he had been carrying it in his mouth for a long time. The room did not go silent, not yet, but the people closest to them stopped breathing as loudly. She felt their eyes pressing on her back. She did not curtsy as deeply as she might have. 8 years of being unseen had taught her many things, but the most useful one was this: when something strange happens, do not give too much away. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not shake. She was proud of that later, when she remembered it. "You are not dancing," he said. "No. Why?" It was a rude question. It was the rudest question anyone had asked her in years, and yet there was no mockery in his voice. He sounded like a man who genuinely wanted to know. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought of 3 answers she might give. 2 of them were polite lies. The third was the truth. She chose the truth. "Because no one has asked me, Your Grace. In 8 years no one has asked me." His eyes did not change. He did not look surprised. He did not look pitying, either, which she was grateful for. He looked, in fact, as if she had told him something he had expected to hear. "Then I am asking," he said. She felt her aunt move closer behind her. Fast, she felt Petra's stare from somewhere near the fire. She felt Lady Marston's mouth fall open. "Your Grace," Vivienne said, and now her voice was lower, almost a whisper. "I do not know you." "No," he said. "You do not. And you do not know me. That," he said, "is a matter on which we may disagree." She did not dance with him. She told him she was tired. She told him she had a headache. She told him she would be poor company. He listened to all 3 reasons. He did not argue with any of them. He bowed again and stepped back, and as he did he said, very quietly, "Then I will hope for another evening, Miss Marsh." He left her there by the window. The room exploded into whispers the moment he was 3 steps away. Her aunt seized her elbow. Petra came rushing over with her face white. Vivienne let her aunt pull her along, let Petra say all the things she was saying, let the gossip rise around her like smoke. She did not hear most of it. She was still feeling the way he had said her name. In the carriage going home, her aunt did not speak. This was worse than being yelled at. Her aunt only fell silent when she was angry beyond words, and her aunt was angry now because something had happened that her aunt did not understand and could not control. Petra spoke enough for both of them. He must have made a mistake. He thought you were someone else. That is the only thing it could be. Imagine the Duke of Carrowmere walking up to Vivienne like she was a person of consequence. He must have been drinking. Or perhaps it was a wager. The young men make wagers all the time about who can be made a fool of. Vivienne looked out the window. The lanterns of the houses passed in the dark. The carriage smelled of damp leather, and the lavender her aunt kept in a small bag against the seat. "He was not drunk," Vivienne said. "Then it was a wager. Perhaps you should not put any meaning on it. You will only embarrass yourself. I have not put any meaning on it. Petra opened her mouth, then closed it. Even Petra could not find a reason to fight with that. They reached the house in Mount Street just before midnight. Vivienne went up the stairs to her room without saying good night. Her maid, Annie, was waiting with the candles low. Annie unlaced the grey gown without asking any questions, which was one of the many reasons Vivienne loved her. When Annie left, Vivienne sat on the edge of her bed in her shift. She held her gloves in her lap. She pressed her thumb against the loose button. She thought about the Duke of Carrowmere saying her name. She could not sleep for a long time. He came to the next event. It was a small musical evening at Lady Halford's, the kind of thing Vivienne usually escaped without anyone noticing she had been there at all. She had not expected him. She had told herself, firmly, in the carriage on the way over, that he would not be there. He was there. He was standing by the fireplace, alone, holding a glass of something he was not drinking. When she came in, he looked up. He did not cross to her this time. He simply watched her come in, watched her find a seat near the back of the room, watched her settle. She did not look at him directly. She looked at him in the small ways a woman learns to look at things when she is not supposed to. In the polish of a silver tray, in the dark mirror over the mantel, in the corner of her eye. He did not approach her until the music had been playing for half an hour. Then he simply walked over and sat down in the empty chair beside her. He did not ask. He did not speak. He just sat. Vivienne kept her eyes on the singer. She had not heard a word of the song. "You came," he said. He said it under the music, so quietly that only she could hear. "I had been told I must." "By whom?" "My aunt." "Your aunt," he said, and there was something in his voice that was almost, but not quite, a smile. "Tell me about her." "There is nothing to tell, Your Grace." "That is a lie, Miss Marsh." She turned her head to look at him then. It was a small movement, but she made it sharp. "You do not know me well enough to call me a liar." "I know," he said. "I am working on it." She was so surprised that she almost laughed. She did not. She turned her face back to the singer, but she did not get up and move, either, and they sat through the rest of the song side by side, not touching, not speaking, two people in a room full of other people, and somehow alone. The third meeting was at a garden party at Vauxhall. Vivienne did not want to go. Her aunt insisted. Petra needed an escort, her aunt said, and Petra's mother was unwell. So Vivienne went, in pale green this time, because Petra had wanted the grey one and her aunt had not stopped her. The garden smelled of cut grass and roses and the river. There were lanterns hung in the trees, and a small orchestra played at the far end of the lawn. Vivienne sat on a bench near a low hedge and watched Petra dance with her viscount. She had no book with her. She had not been allowed to bring one. Miss Marsh. She did not jump. She had been waiting for him without admitting to herself that she had been waiting for him. Your Grace. He sat down. He did not ask permission. She had begun to understand that he never asked permission for things he had decided to do. "It is a warm evening," he said. "Yes, you do not like garden parties. I do not dislike them." "That," he said, "is not the same thing as liking them." A silence fell. She heard the music. She heard, far off, the sound of someone laughing too loudly. She smelled the roses, and beneath that the river, and beneath that the warm, clean smell of him. He smelled of soap and cold air, even on a warm night. She did not know how a man managed to smell of cold air in summer, but he did. "Why do you keep finding me?" she asked. He did not answer for a long moment. She did not push him. She had begun to understand that he did not answer until he had the answer he wanted to give. "Because no one else has," he said at last. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the orchestra, not at her. His face in the lantern light was harder than she had thought before, and younger than she had thought before. She saw for the first time a small white scar at the edge of his jaw. "That is not a reason, Your Grace. It is the only one I have." She did not know what to say to that. So she said nothing. They sat together on the bench and watched the dancers, and after a while he stood and bowed and left her there, and she sat for a long time and did not press the button on her glove once. 2 weeks passed like that. 3 meetings. Each one short. Each one carrying something the last had not carried. Her aunt had stopped speaking to her at meals. Petra had started to be sharp. Society had begun to notice. There were whispers in the shops. A girl Vivienne had been at school with crossed the street to avoid her, as if attention from a duke might be catching, like a fever. Then came the dinner at the Crestworths. Lady Crestworth was an old friend of Vivienne's aunt. She had 3 daughters, all unmarried, all younger than Vivienne, and all considered far prettier. The dinner had been arranged before the business with the Duke had started. Cancelling would have caused worse talk. So Vivienne went. The dining room at the Crestworths was long and very bright. There were too many candles. The air smelled of roast meat and pepper and the strong, oily smell of the polish someone had used on the table that morning. Vivienne was placed near the bottom, between an old colonel and a young clergyman who did not speak. The Duke of Carrowmere was at the head. He had not sought her out before dinner. He had bowed to her once across the room. The kind of bow that was correct and gave nothing away. Her aunt had looked relieved. The whole evening her aunt had been watching like a hawk. Halfway through the second course, Lady Crestworth turned the conversation. It was very smooth. Vivienne admired it, in a small, dark part of herself, even as the lady began to speak. "It is so good," Lady Crestworth said, "to see Miss Marsh out in society again. Truly, I was saying to my Eliza only this morning, was I not, my dear, that one cannot help but feel sorry for a girl who is left so long without an offer. 8 years? Is it not, Vivienne? 8 years since your first season? Oh dear, I have lost count. One does, after such a time." The table did not exactly go quiet, but the soft sounds of forks and conversation thinned. People were listening. 8 years, Lady Crestworth went on, and not one offer. Not one suitor. Truly, my dear, you must be such a comfort to your poor aunt. I have always said a girl who cannot marry should at least try to be useful at home. There is dignity even in that. Is there not? Vivienne's hand was very still in her lap. Under the table, her thumb pressed the loose button on her glove. Once, twice, 3 times. She did not cry. She did not look at her aunt. She did not look at the Duke, though she felt him watching from the head of the table like a held breath. She set her fork down. She did it slowly. She placed it exactly, across the top of her plate, the way her mother had taught her when she was 9 years old. The year before her mother had died. Lady Crestworth, Vivienne said. Her voice was clear. It carried. You are quite right. It has been 8 years. I have counted them too. I have counted every Wednesday night and every Friday evening and every garden party and every musical and every dinner. I have stood by every window in every drawing-room in this town, and I have not been chosen. I am aware of this, my lady. You have not surprised me with this news." She lifted her glass of water. Her hand did not shake. She took a small drink. She set the glass down. "I thank you for your concern," she said. "I shall give it the attention it deserves." She did not say another word. Lady Crestworth had gone the colour of wet paper. The old colonel beside Vivienne made a small sound in his throat. Down the table, someone coughed. Her aunt was looking at her plate. Petra was looking at Vivienne with an expression Vivienne had never seen on her cousin's face before. It was not pity, it was something like fear. Vivienne picked up her fork again. She cut a small piece of meat. She ate it. She did not look up. At the head of the table, the Duke of Carrowmere was not eating. He was sitting very still, with his hand around the stem of his wineglass, and he was looking at Vivienne in a way that no one had ever looked at her in her life. The rest of dinner passed. Somehow people found their voices again. The conversation moved on. Vivienne ate 2 more bites and then could eat no more. When the ladies withdrew, she went with them. She sat on a small sofa in the drawing-room and accepted a cup of tea and did not drink it. The tea smelled of bergamot and felt warm in her hands, and she held it as if it were the only solid thing in the room. Lady Crestworth did not speak to her again that night. When her aunt finally called for the carriage, Vivienne stood up and walked out and did not look at anyone. In the front hall, the Duke was waiting near the door with his coat over his arm. He had come out of the dining room early. He had been waiting. He did not speak to her. He bowed. She curtsied. She passed him on her way to the carriage, and in passing, very quietly, so quietly that even her aunt, 3 steps behind, did not hear. He said, "Miss Marsh." She turned her head, just a little. "You did very well," he said. She did not answer. She got into the carriage. She rode home in silence. She went up the stairs and undressed and got into bed without crying. It was much later, in the dark with the house gone still, that she finally pressed her face into the pillow and let her shoulders shake. She did it quietly. She had learned, in 8 years of being unseen, to do most things quietly. The Duke of Carrowmere did not sleep that night. He sat in the study of his house in Grosvenor Square, in front of a fire that had burned low, and he thought. He was a man who solved problems. He had been raised to solve them. His father had been a duke before him, and had taught him. With the kind of cold patience that left marks, that a man in his position did not feel, he calculated. He looked at a situation, and identified the broken thing, and fixed it. He had identified a broken thing tonight. He thought about the way Vivienne Marsh had set her fork down, the slow, exact placement of it. He thought about her voice, which had not shaken when by every right it ought to have shaken. He thought about the way no one at that table had moved to defend her, not her aunt, not her cousin, not one of the matrons who had sat smiling. He thought about 8 years. He thought about himself, too. He thought about the first night he had seen her, by the window pressing her thumb against the loose button of her glove. He had been told her name months ago by a friend who had asked him, idly, whether he had ever noticed Miss Marsh at the back of every party they had both attended. He had not then. He had begun to after. He had been watching her for 3 months before he ever spoke to her. He had not told her this. He thought she might be angry if she knew. He took out a piece of paper and began to write. He wrote until the candles burned low. He wrote a list. He wrote names, places, the dates of things to be done. He was very practical when he had decided on a thing. He did not believe in love at first sight, because he did not believe in things that were not earned, but he believed in attention. He believed that a man who paid close attention to a thing for long enough came to know it. And he had been paying very close attention. He folded the list. He sealed it. He set it on his desk for the morning. Then, for the first time in many years, he stood at his study window and looked out at the dark garden and let himself feel what he had been refusing to feel. He was not a man who said the word love easily. He thought, in fact, that he did not yet know what he felt. He only knew that the thought of Vivienne Marsh standing at another window in another drawing-room, pressing her thumb against the button of her glove, while one more cruel woman said one more cruel thing in front of one more silent table, was something he could no longer permit. He had decided. He would act. He acted on a Friday. The event was a ball at the Marchioness of Penmore's, one of the largest balls of the season. Everyone would be there. He had counted on this. He arrived at 10 o'clock, which was earlier than he usually came to such things. He greeted his hostess. He moved through the rooms with the same closed-door face he always wore. He did not look for Vivienne until he had spoken to the people he had to speak to. He was a methodical man. When he found her, she was in the second drawing-room, near a pair of doors that opened onto a small balcony. She was wearing pale blue. Her aunt had not chosen the dress. He could tell because it suited her. He had begun, in these 3 weeks, to recognize the difference between the things that suited her and the things her aunt had chosen. She was alone, of course. There was a small space around her that no one had filled. People had been keeping their distance since the Crestworth dinner. The story had travelled fast. Some people pitied her. Some people thought she had been impertinent. Most people were waiting to see what would happen next. He crossed the room directly. He did not stop to bow to anyone. He felt the heads turn. He let them turn. He stopped in front of her. The musicians were between dances. The room was, for one terrible moment, almost quiet. Miss Marsh, he said. She had seen him coming. She had been watching the door for an hour, without admitting she had been watching it. She curtsied. Her face was perfectly still. Your Grace. He did not bow back, he went down on one knee. The sound the room made was not a gasp. It was something stranger. It was the sound of 100 people stopping in the middle of their lives. The musicians, who had been about to begin a new piece, did not begin it. The dancers near the open doorway turned. The conversations in the next room broke off as people felt the change in the air and came to see. Within 10 seconds, the second drawing room of the Marchioness of Penmore was packed shoulder to shoulder, and not one person was speaking. The room went silent. Truly silent. Vivienne could hear the fire in the grate. She could hear her own breath. She could hear, somewhere far away in the house, a clock striking the half-hour. The Duke of Carrowmere was on one knee in front of her. He had not taken her hand. He was looking up at her with the same heavy, unsmiling gaze he had given her in the doorway of Ashbourne Hall 3 weeks before. Miss Marsh, he said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The room was so quiet that a whisper would have carried. I have come to ask you to be my wife. She did not move. She could not. She felt the cold of her hands inside her gloves. She felt the heat of the candles on her face. She smelled the roses someone had set in a vase by the door, and underneath that, the same clean, cold air smell of him she had smelled in the garden at Vauxhall. She did not answer. He did not rise. He did not look impatient. He waited. She thought, in that long stretching moment, of Lady Crestworth's voice, of Petra's white face in the carriage, of her aunt's tight mouth, of 8 years of grey gowns and counted candles, of the button on her glove. She also thought of him sitting beside her at the musical evening, saying, I am working on it, of him on the bench at Vauxhall, saying because no one else has, of him at the Crestworth's front door, saying you did very well. She thought of all of it in 3 seconds. The room held its breath. Your Grace, she said. Her voice was clear. It carried, the way it had carried at the Crestworth table. I will give you my answer, she said, but not here. A small sound went through the crowd. It was not approval. It was not disapproval. It was surprise. He nodded once. He rose. He bowed to her, properly the bow of a man who had asked a question and been told to wait for the answer. He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked through the silent room together. The crowd parted for them. Vivienne did not look at her aunt. She did not look at Petra. She did not look at Lady Marston, who had appeared at the edge of the gathering with her mouth open. She looked straight ahead, and she walked beside the Duke of Carrowmere, and behind them the room stayed silent until they had passed all the way out into the front hall. He led her to a small side parlor and closed the door. The parlor was cold. The fire had not been lit. The only light came from 2 candles on the mantel and from the moon, which fell white through the tall windows. The room smelled of dust and old wood, and the dry stems of dried lavender that someone had placed in a bowl on the table by the window. He stepped back from her. He gave her space. He did not stand between her and the door. Speak freely, he said. She walked to the window. She put her hand against the cold glass. She breathed. Your Grace. My name, he said quietly, is Alistair. She did not turn. She kept her hand on the glass. I have a question, Your Grace. Ask. She turned then. She faced him. Her chin was up. Why? He did not pretend not to understand. He did not say something about her beauty or her grace or her conversation. He stood in the middle of the cold parlor with his hands loose at his sides, and he answered her. I saw you, he said, for the first time 3 months ago. It was at Lady Brace's. You were standing by the window then, too. You were pressing the button on your right glove. I did not know your name. I asked. I was told your name was Marsh, that you were the niece of Mrs. Marsh of Mount Street, and that you had been out for too many seasons to be of interest. She did not move. She did not breathe. I came back the next week, he said. You were at Lady Halford's. You were near a side door, holding a book you were not reading. I watched you for 40 minutes. You did not move. You did not speak. You did not look at anyone in a way that asked them to come over. He paused. He did not look away from her. I thought at first that you were proud. I was wrong. The next week I saw you at a smaller event, the one at Lord Brent's. A girl spilled wine on her own gown near the punch table. She was about to cry. You went to her. You said something I could not hear. The girl laughed. You walked away before her mother could thank you. You did not want thanks. Vivienne's hand had come away from the window. It was hanging at her side. I have been watching you for 3 months, he said. I am sorry I did not tell you. I should have. I am a man who has been lied to many times in my life, Miss Marsh, by people who wanted things from me. I wanted to be sure. I wanted to know what you were when no one was looking. Now I know. You are a woman who is kind to a stranger by a punch table, and who does not require thanks. You are a woman who can tell the truth to Lady Crestworth at her own table and not lose her dignity. You are a woman who has been overlooked for 8 years, and who has not become cruel. His voice went lower. I am not a man who can give you flowery speeches. I will not pretend to be. I came here tonight because I will not allow another evening to pass in which you stand by another window and are not chosen. If you do not want me, you have only to say so. I will not trouble you again. But you will not be unseen. Not by me. Not from this night. The room was very still. Outside, somewhere on the street, a horse stamped against the cold stones. Vivienne walked across the parlor. She did not walk quickly. She walked the way she had walked out of the Marchioness's drawing room, with her chin up and her steps even. She stopped in front of him. She took off her right glove. She did it slowly. She slid the soft leather down her wrist and over her fingers, and held the glove in her left hand. She held out her bare hand to him. He looked at it. He looked at her face. He lifted his own hand. He took hers. His hand was warm. She had not expected that. She did not know why she had expected it to be cold. He held her hand carefully, as if he was being trusted with something he did not yet know how to carry. Alistair, she said. He closed his eyes for a moment. Only a moment. Then he opened them again. Vivienne, he said. She nodded. That was all. She did not say yes out loud. She did not need to. He understood. She had spoken her answer the moment she had taken off her glove. He raised her hand. He pressed his mouth to the back of it. Once, briefly, he did not kiss her on the mouth. He did not pull her against him. He held her hand in both of his and looked at her and did not look away. Tomorrow, he said, I will call on your aunt. I will speak to her properly. Tonight I only wanted you to know. I know, she said. He let go of her hand. He stepped back. He did not stop looking at her. I will see you home, he said. She put her glove back on as they walked back through the house. The drawing rooms were still full. The crowd, which had not quite finished talking about what had happened, fell silent again as they passed. Vivienne did not press the button on her right glove. She did not need to. In the carriage her aunt did not speak. Petra did not speak. They drove home through the cold London streets, and the silence in the carriage was not the silence of anger this time. It was the silence of people who did not yet understand what they had seen. Vivienne sat by the window of the carriage and watched the lanterns of the houses pass in the dark. She thought, not for the first time, how much she would like to be one of those horses, standing in the cold and waiting. But this time the thought was different. This time, she thought, she would not have to wait long. The story did not end that night. There was the calling on her aunt the next day, and the writing to her father in the country, and the long, careful preparation of all the things a duke must prepare when he marries. There was the gossip, which lasted for many weeks. There were the matrons who had pushed their daughters at him for years, and who now had to find new things to talk about. There was Lady Crestworth, who sent a very long letter of congratulation that was not answered. There was also Petra. Petra came to Vivienne's room 3 days after the Penmore ball. She stood in the doorway and did not come in. Her face was the same white it had been at the dinner. Vivienne, Petra said, Yes, I said many things to you over the years. I know. I was not kind. You were not. Petra's hands were knotted in her shawl. She was not crying, but her voice was thin. I did not think you would ever be chosen. I am sorry. I think I said it out loud once. I am sorry. Vivienne was sitting at her dressing table. She did not turn around. She looked at Petra in the mirror. Petra, yes, sit down. Petra came and sat on the edge of the bed. I have not forgiven you yet, Vivienne said. I do not know when I will. But I do not hate you. And I will not punish you. There has been enough of that in this house. Petra nodded. Her face was wet now. She wiped it with the back of her hand. She left. She did not say anything else. Her aunt never apologized. That was its own answer. Vivienne accepted it. There was, in the middle of all this, a small thing that Vivienne did not learn for several weeks. She learned it from her maid, Annie, who had heard it from a friend who worked in the kitchens of the Duke of Carrowmere's house. A young footman in the Duke's household had been ill in the autumn. He had a sister who had been working as a seamstress and had lost her position. The sister had a child. There was no money. The footman had asked, very carefully and very respectfully, whether the Duke would consider lending him a small sum until his sister found new work. The Duke had not lent him a sum. He had paid the sister's rent for a year. He had found her a position with the housekeeper of his country estate, a woman who was kind and needed a seamstress. He had paid for the child to be looked after. He had not mentioned it to anyone. He had done it in writing through his man of business, and had told the footman only that the matter was handled. The Duke had never told Vivienne this. Annie told her, sitting on the edge of her bed one night while she brushed out Vivienne's hair. He doesn't speak of it, ma'am. The footman tried to thank him in the hall once. His Grace said it was a private matter and would not be spoken of. Vivienne sat very still. Annie kept brushing. The candle on the dressing table burned low, and the smell of the wax was thick in the room. How long ago, Annie? This past October, ma'am. 3 months before he ever spoke to you, I am told. Vivienne did not say anything. She let Annie braid her hair for bed. When Annie left, she sat at her dressing table for a long time. She thought about him sitting in his study at night, writing his careful letters of business, paying a year's rent for a woman he had never met. She thought about a man who would do such a thing and never speak of it. She did not mention it to him. She thought, perhaps, that he would not want her to. But she carried the knowledge with her after that, like a small warm coal in the pocket of her dress. It was the thing, more than the kneeling, more than the silent room, more than the ride home in the carriage, that made her certain. She was going to love him. She thought, perhaps, that she already did. The wedding was small. Both of them had wanted it that way. It was held at the chapel on the Duke's estate in Hertfordshire, a small grey building of old stones with ivy on the south wall. The morning of it, fog hung in the fields like wet wool. There were perhaps 30 people in the chapel. Vivienne's father came up from Devon. He was an old man now and could not travel often, but he made the trip. He cried during the ceremony, which surprised everyone, including himself. Vivienne had not known he could still cry. Her aunt came. Petra came. Both of them sat near the back. They did not say much. They were quieter now than they had been before. The change had begun in them, and it was not finished, but it had begun. Vivienne wore a gown that was not grey. It was a soft cream, and her veil was very simple, and she carried a small bunch of winter roses from the Duke's garden. The roses smelled faintly of pepper and of cold air. The Duke wore black, as he always did. But he had chosen a black that was not quite the black of all his other coats. Vivienne noticed. She did not say anything. She found out later it had been his father's wedding coat. He had not worn it once in 12 years. When they exchanged their vows, his hand around hers was warm. The chapel smelled of beeswax and old stone and the wet earth outside. The vicar's voice was thin and careful. The Duke's voice was steady. So was Vivienne's. There was no music. They had not wanted any. After the ceremony, they walked out into the cold morning together. The fog had lifted a little. The grass between the chapel and the great house glittered with melting frost. Their shoes crunched against it. Vivienne could see her own breath. She could see his. He turned to her at the edge of the chapel yard before they reached the others. "Vivienne, yes, I want to thank you." "For what?" "For taking off your glove." She laughed then. It was the first time he had ever heard her laugh aloud, and his face changed when she did. The hard line of his mouth softened. He looked, for 1 second, younger than 34. Then her aunt came up to them, and her father came up to them, and the small group walked together to the great house, and there was breakfast, and the day became what it became. 1 year later, in winter, in the great house of Carrowmere, the Duchess of Carrowmere sat in a small sitting room she had made her own. It was a room on the east side of the house, with a window that looked over the rose garden and the long lawn down to the lake. She had chosen it because of the light. She had had the walls painted a very soft yellow, not grey. She was reading a letter. The fire in the grate was high. The room smelled of wood smoke and of the hyacinths in a small blue bowl on the table by the window. Outside, the lawn was white with snow, and the lake at the bottom of it was frozen near the edges. A fat black dog of unclear breeding was asleep at her feet. The Duke had given her the dog in the spring, having heard her say once months earlier that her father had kept dogs when she was a child, and that the house had felt different when there had been one in it. She heard his step in the hall. She knew the sound of it without looking up. He came in. He was in his riding clothes. He had come straight from the stables. He smelled of cold air. Again, of cold air and horse and the faintest trace of soap. He bent and kissed the top of her head as he passed. "What is the letter?" he asked. "From Petra." He sat down in the chair across from her. He stretched his long legs toward the fire. The fat black dog opened one eye, considered him, and went back to sleep. "She is to have a child in the spring," Vivienne said. "Good. She asks if she may come to us in the summer." "She may." Vivienne folded the letter. She set it on the small table beside her chair. She watched her husband watching the fire. He looked tired. He had been at the South Tenancies all morning. There had been a problem with a wall that had needed mending. She slid off her chair and crossed the small distance to him. She sat down on the rug at his feet. She leaned her head against his knee. He put his hand on her hair. The fire crackled. The clock on the mantel ticked. The dog snored gently. Outside, the snow began again, small and slow against the window glass. She lifted her hand. She pressed her thumb against the back of his hand, lightly, twice. He smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the smile of a man who knew exactly what she was saying. He had ordered her gloves remade in the autumn. The buttons of every glove she now owned were sewn on with a small, deliberate looseness. She had not asked him to do it. She had not known until she had received the first pair from the dressmaker and pressed her thumb against the button without thinking, and felt it shift. She had wept, very briefly, in front of the dressmaker. The dressmaker had pretended not to see. She had not asked the Duke about it. She had decided, in fact, that she would never ask him about it. Some things were better held quietly between two people, the way a small warm coal is better held in a pocket than shown about a room. She pressed his hand again. He pressed hers back. They sat like that for a long time, in the small yellow room with the snow falling outside, and neither of them spoke, and the only sounds were the fire and the clock, and the soft breathing of the dog. And somewhere far off, in another part of the great house, a maid singing as she went up the stairs. It was very warm. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If this moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive.